The first time I saw Nian Zhou, I asked him if he wanted to be my dog. I wasn't being kind. I wanted to humiliate him. I expected him to pull away in disgust, maybe even slap my hand. Instead, he lowered his gaze, gently held my fingertips, and softly said, "Master." Later, that same obedient dog had me pinned against the wall, kissing and biting me with an unrelenting hunger. His voice, hoarse and low, murmured against my ear. "I already agreed to be your dog. Letting me kiss you isn't asking for too much, is it? Baby," he deliberately teased, dragging out the word before adding, "Master." That night, as I stared at the chandelier swaying wildly above us, it finally dawned on me. The dog I'd brought home had always wanted me, and somehow, I let him have his way. I was born into privilege, raised in comfort, and had never known hardship. But all that changed when a system bound itself to me, forcing me to win over a penniless orphan with nothing to his name. I didn't want to do it. I found the whole idea revolting. When I first met Nian Zhou, I crouched down in front of him with a smirk, mocking him as I asked, "Do you want to be my dog?" I was ready for him to shove my hand away in disgust. Instead, he lowered his lashes, reached out to hold my fingertips, and quietly said, "Master." Just like that, Nian Zhou became mine, a loyal little dog, or so I thought. It wasn't until later that I realized Nian Zhou never wanted to be my dog. What he really wanted was me. One night when his fever burned hot enough to scare me, his gaze clouded and unfocused, he still managed to grab my collar and rasp my name, Chen Cheng. His voice was low but insistent, tinged with something possessive. And I glanced at his slender fingers gripping my shirt before prying his hand off without hesitation. The force ripped my collar, exposing my collarbone and a sliver of skin. I ignored it, letting my voice grow cold. "What do you think you're doing?" "I want you," he said, straight to the point. His dark eyes, gleaming like a wolf's in the dim light, stayed locked on mine. For a moment I was stunned. Then I arched a brow and smirked. "Oh, so that's what you want, to sleep with me?" I leaned in slightly, voice dripping with mockery. "So tell me, who's going to be on top?" He didn't answer, but his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Then, instead of speaking, he reached for the buttons of my shirt, clearly intending to show me his answer. That was my limit. I shoved him away and stood up, looking down at him with cold disdain. If it weren't for his fever, I might have slapped him right then and there. "Enough, Nian Zhou," I said sharply. "Don't push your luck." Even feverish and barely conscious, he still looked at me with confusion. His dark eyes clouded, yet somehow full of grievance. "Chen Cheng," he murmured softly, almost pitifully. "Master." Cautiously, he reached out to tug at my shirt again, but his fingers barely brushed the fabric before I stepped back. "Don't touch me." I caught the exact moment his hand froze in the air, his fingers trembling slightly before curling inward as if to hide his shame. He stared at me, his lips parting to speak, but no words came out. His brows furrowed deeply, and his gaze held a silent plea that he couldn't put into words. At that moment the system chimed in, its voice oddly accusatory. "You promised to take care of him, to treat him like a dog. Is this how you treat your pet?" Its nagging made my head throb. I half expected it to accuse me of animal cruelty next. "Shut up," I snapped internally. "Go bother someone else. Why are you even here?" I paused for a moment before adding sarcastically, "What, are you planning to stick around and watch if I get intimate with him?" The system stammered, clearly thrown off. "That's none of your business," I shot back, keeping my face impassive in front of Nian Zhou. "Even if I decide to take him here and now, you have no say in the matter." "Fine, stop talking. I'm not watching anything inappropriate. I'm logging off." Once I was sure the system was gone, I leaned down and grabbed Nian Zhao's wrist. He froze, but I didn't stop. My hand moved up his arm, sliding from his wrist to his shoulder before finally cupping his chin and forcing him to look up at me. He let me do it without resisting, his dark eyes wide and wary. I tilted my head and smiled faintly. "Nian Zhou, do you know what you are?" "You're just a little dog I picked up, a pet," I said, my voice soft but biting. "Do you really think you could be on top? Don't kid yourself." Not that I had any intention of doing anything with him, but even if I did, he'd never be the one in control. Pets only have one job, to obey. You're no exception. You think you can pin me down? You're not qualified, Nian Zhou. I patted his cheek lightly. I refuse. Then, what am I allowed to do? His voice was hoarse, his grip on the bed tightening so much that I felt it in my hand. If I can't, if you won't let me, then what can I do? Allowed to do? I smiled faintly, my eyes narrowing. You can kiss me. The next moment Nian Zhou leaned in, his lashes trembling as his lips brushed against the corner of mine. His tongue barely grazed my lips before he pulled away. Good boy. I ruffled his hair, pulling him into my arms. His feverish warmth seeped through my clothes, his head resting heavily on my shoulder. Pets really are best for occasional amusement, I thought to myself. When they're obedient, they're irresistibly endearing. I kissed the top of his head, holding him tighter. All you need to do is obey. Do as I say and stop entertaining those foolish ideas. Understand? He didn't answer at first. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. The next morning, I woke up to find Nian Zhou and I had shared the same bed. I remembered clearly that I'd fallen asleep fully aware, and I was certain nothing had happened last night. Without much reaction, I quietly lifted the blanket, got out of bed, and began changing clothes. It was Nian Zhou who sat on the bed, wrapped in the blanket, unmoving for a long time. He seemed hesitant, like he had something to say. Eventually, while I was in the bathroom washing up, he poked his head in and asked softly, "Did we sleep in the same bed last night?" I glanced back at the still messy bed. "What do you think?" I replied indifferently. He bit his lip, withdrawing his head, but a few seconds later, he poked it back in. Did anything happen last night?" I was buttoning my shirt, and I turned to look at him. My voice remained calm. "Nothing happened. But," he hesitated, looking down. His hair was naturally disheveled, making him appear pitifully fragile. He raised a hand to awkwardly press his lips. "But when I looked in the mirror just now, my lips seemed really red," he murmured, "and kind of swollen." I squinted at his lips under the morning light. Sure enough, they were slightly swollen. That was my doing, a result of last night when his fever had left him dazed, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. I'd kissed him then, pressed him down, and kissed him until his lips were swollen. Blame it on my lack of restraint, my fleeting weakness for temptation. But I wasn't about to admit that. "They look normal to me," I said, clearing my throat and deliberately looking away, forcing a tone of indifference. "You're imagining things." "Really?" "Really." He didn't leave, instead standing there staring at me for a while. Then suddenly he asked, "Chen Cheng, did you kiss me?" "No," I said without hesitation, nearly slamming the glass down onto the sink. I brushed past him, leaving the bathroom. "Stop being so full of yourself." "Oh, and one more thing," I added, forcing my voice to sound as cold and composed as usual. "After you're done tidying up, come to our room." "All right," Nian Zhou answered obediently. He didn't press me about whether I'd kissed him. "Is there something you need?" "Yes," I said with a faint, emotionless smile, turning to glance at him. "I need you to help your master get dressed." The school uniform at Wangjiang consisted of a two-piece suit, a shirt, trousers, a blazer, and a tie, no vest included. Nian Zhao stood close to me, carefully fastening the last button on my shirt. Then, he picked up the tie he'd prepared in advance. His expression was focused, long lashes casting shadows over his cheeks. I caught a faint scent of his body wash as his slender, strong fingers tied a neat half-Windsor knot with practiced ease. For a brief moment, my thoughts wandered. If I spent the rest of my life with Nian Zhao, would he do this every morning? Buttoning my shirt, tying my tie, and sending me off to work with a lingering good morning kiss? Perhaps he'd kiss my forehead, or the corner of my lips, before I left. My daydream broke when he gently placed the blazer over my shoulders and softly said, "All done." "All right, let's head out," I replied, deliberately keeping my voice cold. The day's one small blessing was that, last night, I'd maintained enough restraint not to leave any visible marks on Nian Zhou. Once we got to school, we were supposed to part ways at the gate and head to our respective buildings. But as he turned to leave, I reached out and grabbed his wrist, pulling him back. He glanced at my hand on his arm, confused. "What is it?" "Hold still." I tipped my head up slightly as he was taller than me, studying his lips closely. Once I was sure the redness and swelling had completely faded, I finally released him with a sigh of relief. "Nothing. You're good to go." I paused, noticing his pale complexion. "You don't look so good," I added. A sickly dog wasn't a good look, and if the system saw it, I'd probably be accused of neglect. Nian Zhao lowered his gaze, his long lashes half hiding his fragile expression. He tugged lightly at my sleeve and said softly, "I don't feel great. What should I do?" After a moment's thought, I said, "Come to my classroom during every break today." "Okay." He agreed without hesitation, but after a slight pause, he asked, "What for?" "For nothing," I said, brushing his hair out of his face. "Just let me see you." I wanted to make sure he was still in one piece after each class, especially with CU around. That guy was an unpredictable troublemaker, likely to cause a scene at any moment. It was because of him that Nian Zhao had ended up falling into the pool yesterday during their stupid swimming contest. leading to a high fever that lasted all night. Just thinking about CU made my blood boil. If I didn't have class, I'd drag him out right now and beat him senseless. While I was fuming, Nian Zhou leaned closer, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered softly, "Master." "I know," I replied, turning my hand to grasp his wrist, feeling his face nuzzle briefly into my palm. "Come find me after class." For the entire first period I couldn't focus. My left palm still felt warm and tingling from where Nian Zhou had leaned into it. It was like my hand didn't belong to me anymore. Zhao Qingyu, sitting at a desk in front of me, turned around during a discussion period and propped her chin on her hand. "What's up, young master?" she teased. "You've been distracted all morning. I even caught you staring at your hand a few times. What's going on? Did someone cast a spell on you?" "You're the one under a spell," I snapped, rolling my eyes and resting my head on my folded arms. "I'm thinking about Nian Zhou." "Nian Zhou?" She thought for a moment. "Oh, the tall, handsome guy who left with you yesterday?" I glanced at her lazily. "He's my dog." "Your what?" She blinked, stunned. "Is that what you city people call your boyfriends? A dog? You really care about him, don't you?" "Do I?" I retorted half-heartedly. "Well, if you don't care, why are you thinking about him?" I had no response. She had a point. As soon as the bell rang, I left the classroom and waited by the door for Nian Zhou. When he arrived, I grabbed his wrist again and pulled him to a quiet corner of the building. He stumbled slightly behind me, and I turned to give him a sharp look. "What? Can't even stand properly? Are you really that out of it?" "I'm fine," he mumbled, lowering his gaze to where our hands were still linked. "But is it okay for people to see us like this?" "See what?" I let go of his hand, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "It's just holding hands. You make it sound like we're sneaking around. Besides, people are already saying you're my kept lover. And if you are, so what?" I added, staring at him. "What's the problem? Are you ashamed?" "No." His lashes quivered as he looked away. "That's not what I meant." "Then what?" "I'm worried." "You wouldn't want to be seen," he admitted softly. What kind of logic was that? If I didn't want to be seen, I wouldn't have grabbed his hand in the first place. I clicked my tongue in irritation. "Why didn't you say so earlier? People have already seen everything by now." Nian Zhou bit his lip lightly, his gaze conflicted. "I know, but I couldn't bring myself to let go of your hand." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Master." The word was drawn out, sticky and teasing, as he gave me a faint, mischievous smile. "This is the first time you've ever held my hand. And I'm happy." I stared at his face, his delicate features so close to mine, momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, after a long silence, I sighed and softened my tone. "This corner is usually empty. No one will see us here. You can relax." It was a secluded spot in the hallway, a place I liked to hang out in between classes. Over time, people stopped coming here. It wasn't worth risking my temper. Right now, it was so quiet that I could have pulled Nian Zhou into a kiss, pressing him against the wall, and no one would disturb us. "So," I said to Nian Zhou with a smile, "can I hold your hand now?" He froze for a moment, then obediently nodded. "You can." I tilted my chin toward him. "Then give me your hand." Without hesitation, he extended his hand toward me, and I easily took it, placing something in his palm. Then, in a commanding tone, I said loudly, "Hold this in your mouth." He blinked, confused, and looked up at me. "Hold what in my mouth? Are you blind?" "It's a thermometer." I frowned and tightened his fingers around it, ensuring he wouldn't drop it. "What else would it be?" "This was borrowed from the school infirmary right before class ended," I added matter-of-factly. "If you drop it, I'll make sure you regret it." "Oh," he replied softly, then hesitated. "But I think Zhao Suiji has a digital thermometer, doesn't she?" Zhao Qingyu, our class monitor, was also the student council vice president and the captain of the basketball team. She always had a stock of common first aid supplies, including a digital thermometer. However, the mercury thermometer I'd borrowed was more accurate for oral readings. "Why do you have so much to say?" My frown deepened. "Hurry up and use it." This time he didn't argue. Obediently, he placed the thermometer under his tongue, his lashes lowering slightly. The quiet compliance made him seem even more docile. I couldn't resist reaching out to pinch his cheek, and when he glared at me in mock indignation, I laughed softly and let go. After that, I led him to sit on the steps outside. "Keep it in for at least 60 seconds, I instructed, bending slightly to look down at him. "Only then can you check the reading. It's morning, so anything above 37.22 degrees Celsius counts as a fever. Do you know how to read the numbers?" He nodded. "Good." I ran my fingers through his hair, smoothing it from root to tip. Once you're done, if the fever's gone, go to class. If you're still running a fever, call the driver and head home. There's a doctor there. You don't need to come find me during every break. It's too tiring. I straightened up and turned to leave, but before I could take a step, he lightly tugged at the hem of my shirt. I paused but didn't look back. Be good, Nian Zhou, I said, prying his fingers off me. Do things on your own when you can. Stop being so clingy. I was older than Nian Zhou, and I'd be graduating from Wangjiang in June. When I got home that evening, my grandfather called me to the tea room to discuss my plans. I'm thinking of sending you abroad, he said, studying me carefully. But it's ultimately your decision. If you agree, I'll start making arrangements immediately. If not, staying here in City A is fine. A university is one of the top schools in the country. I hesitated briefly before shaking my head. I want to go to City C, City C. Down south, I lowered my gaze. Yes. My mother had studied architecture at C University, where she'd met my father. Their love story was one of youthful serendipity, and even after marriage, their relationship remained strong, until tragedy struck. Had they not passed away so young, they would have been a couple everyone envied. Grandfather seemed to understand my reasoning and didn't argue. All right, you've grown up. The choice is yours. On the way back to my room, the system unexpectedly chimed in. We don't have a relationship, I corrected it. Same difference. Either way, you're going to be apart. Shouldn't you spend more time with him while you still can? Maybe visit his room tonight? I'm just going to study, I replied, rolling my eyes. It's not like I'm dying. There's no need to be so dramatic. We'll have plenty of chances to see each other later. Ignoring its continued chatter, I returned to my room. What I didn't expect was to hear the faint sound of my door opening late that night. No one in the Chen family would enter my room uninvited. Grandfather wouldn't, and the others wouldn't dare. Only Nian Zhou, reckless and unrestrained, would. Did I say you could come in? I sat up, still wrapped in my blanket, and looked at him standing by the door. Who allowed this? Who's been indulging your bad habits? I'm sorry, he apologized instantly, walking over and crouching beside my bed. I just wanted to check on you. Did I wake you? Are you done checking? I asked coldly. If you are, you can leave now. He hesitated for a moment, then lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, master. Please don't be mad. Don't make me leave, okay? Didn't you say you needed someone to warm your bed? He clutched the edge of my bed, tilting his head to look up at me. I can do that for you. Is that all right? I should have said no and kicked him out, but for some reason I didn't. Instead, after a long pause, I reached out and tugged lightly at his wrist. If he were a real puppy, his tail would have been wagging furiously. In the dark, he climbed into my bed, pulling the blanket over himself. I let out a long sigh. The real problem wasn't that Nian Zhou had gotten into my bed, it was that I'd allowed it. I clutched the edge of the blanket tightly, struggling internally before finally lying back down. Nian Zhou shifted to face me, wrapping an arm around my waist and pulling me closer. I didn't push him away. Instead, I adjusted the blanket over him. Chen Cheng, he murmured softly. You're leaving, aren't you? I can't stay at Wangjiang forever. Where are you going? C University. That's in the south, he whispered. It's so far away. He leaned in, burying his head against my chest. Will you forget me? Probably not. I patted his head. My memory's not that bad, I'm not a goldfish. In September, I left for City C alone. At the airport, Nian Zhou clung to me for as long as he could, holding the hem of my shirt and refusing to let go. Just before I boarded, he suddenly leaned in and bit my lower lip, hard. Even halfway through the flight, my lip still throbbed slightly. By the time I landed and took off my mask at the hotel, I found it swollen and bruised. He'd left his mark. Once school started, I didn't hear much from him. He rarely messaged me, and when I called grandfather to check on him, I was told he'd been busy with his studies. I didn't reach out either. Instead, someone else began contacting me frequently, a boy from a neighboring department. He was strikingly beautiful, with delicate, almost feminine features and shoulder-length hair. He sometimes tied back. His appearance matched the type I might have been interested in before, and he made no secret of his interest in me. Staring at my silent phone, I debated messaging Nian Zhou to ask what he'd been up to lately. He hadn't contacted me in so long. Was he dead or something? Just then, my phone buzzed with 2 new messages. They weren't from Nian Zhou. They were from him, the other boy, Gu Yu. Are you free today, Chen Cheng? Come have a drink with me, followed by the location of a bar. If I wasn't mistaken, it was a well-known gay bar. A moment later, Gu Yu sent a photo, a shot of his legs in a maid outfit. His intentions couldn't have been more obvious, laid out as plainly as day. He probably didn't just want to have a drink. Normally, I'd refuse him outright, as I always did. But for some reason today, I replied, okay. Then I forwarded the bar's location to Nian Zhou. I rarely drink, though I can hold my liquor. Gu Yu, on the other hand, couldn't even handle 2 drinks. His eyes glazed over, and he leaned heavily against me, his hand boldly sliding onto my shoulder. I leaned forward to put my glass down and slapped his hand away. I agreed to have a drink with you, not to let you touch me. Keep your hands to yourself. Why? Gu Yu slurred, his hand creeping back, this time brushing against my face. Am I not good-looking enough for you? What type do you even like? He was, of course, good-looking. But I already had a puppy at home. I've told you before, I'm not interested. I grabbed his hand and shoved it off again. Patting my pocket for my phone, I added, our driver is nearby. I'll have him take you home. Noticing his sullen expression, I added, you still remember where you live, right? I'm not going back. Gu Yu's voice rose sharply. His brows furrowed as he stared me down. I've never been rejected this badly before. I have looks, I have money, I even sent you intimate pictures. What more do you want? What exactly makes me so unappealing to you? Gu Yu, I said coldly, texting the driver while keeping my voice steady. The only reason I haven't blocked you, and still acknowledge you, is because of the relationship between our families. My grandfather and your father go way back. If not for that, I wouldn't even be speaking to you right now. Don't push your luck. But Gu Yu was far more persistent than I'd expected. He didn't back down after hearing my rejection. Instead, he leaned closer, one hand tugging at the collar of my shirt while the other slid to my waist. I raised my hand to slap him, trying to shove him off, but he was surprisingly heavy for someone so lean. I couldn't move him. My gaze shifted to the table, where my glass sat within reach. Just as I reached for it, planning to smash it over his head, someone yanked Gu Yu off me with such force, it stunned me. The sheer strength of that grip, it only took one hand to do what I couldn't manage with all my effort. I looked up to see who it was. It was Nian Zhou. He stood there, drenched in alcohol, his expression cold as liquid dripped from his hair and down his face. He didn't spare Gu Yu a single glance, his eyes fixed solely on me. Chen Cheng, he said, his voice low and tightly controlled. Who is he? This wasn't the place for explanations. Fortunately, the driver arrived quickly. I had him escort Gu Yu out and take him home. Then I pulled Nian Zhou upstairs to a private room Gu Yu had reserved earlier. Judging by his earlier behavior, Gu Yu probably had plans for this room tonight, but he wouldn't be needing it now. Once inside, I pushed Nian Zhou toward the bathroom. Go take a shower. I'll call someone to bring up clean clothes. He stood still, head bowed, and didn't move. After a few seconds, he suddenly wrapped his arms around me. Let go, Nian Zhou, I said, struggling against him. You reek of alcohol. Go shower first. I don't want to, he murmured, resting his head on my shoulder. Who is that guy? I sighed, giving up on pushing him away. Instead, I patted his back gently. Gu Yu, the youngest son of the Gu family. He's my classmate. His father and my grandfather are old friends. You've probably seen him at our house before. I haven't, he said hoarsely, holding me tighter. I don't remember him. Then forget it. He's not important. I ruffled his hair. Now be good and go shower. Your clothes are soaked. You'll catch a cold if you don't. After a long pause, he finally responded with a quiet, okay, and let me go, heading to the bathroom. The clean clothes arrived shortly after, and I brought them to him. He thanked me but remained visibly upset. When he came out of the shower, his hair still dripping, he walked up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist again, his damp head nuzzling against my neck. Stop that, it tickles. I turned slightly to look at him. Why are you here? Wang Jiang is on break. I came to see you, he said softly. I saw the location you sent and came straight over. After a pause, he asked, do you like him? Who? I blinked, confused. Gu Yu? Instead of answering, he bit my shoulder lightly and asked again. Do you like someone like him? No, I replied, turning my head away. What makes you think I do? He touched you, he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with grievance. And you didn't stop him. I didn't let him touch me, I corrected. But he hugged you, he murmured, sounding even more hurt. And you didn't push him away. Master, he said suddenly, his voice even softer. Are you going to leave me? Of course not. I patted the back of his hand reassuringly. Just as I was about to explain that I hadn't been able to push Gu Yu off, I hesitated and decided against it. Instead, I said, I was just curious. Curious about what? He raised his head abruptly, staring at me. I smirked. I've always known my orientation. But in all these years, I've never met anyone who interested me. I thought. Maybe I should give him a try. His eyes darkened instantly. Why him? He's good-looking, I replied casually. Very handsome. I'm good-looking too, he said firmly. I blinked, caught off guard. What? Then try me instead, Chen Cheng, he said, leaning closer to press a kiss against my neck. If you want to try, why not try with me? Am I any less attractive than him? Truthfully, he wasn't. By any standard, Nian Zhou was objectively stunning. I chuckled. And how do you suggest we try, exactly? I tilted my head slightly, hooking a finger under his chin. Aren't you a little too young for this? I'm an adult. Still too young. You're still at Wangjiang, I teased. Doesn't that make me a bit of a predator? Trying doesn't mean we have to end up in bed, he said, gripping my wrist firmly. We can start small. Like what? Under the dim light of the room, he closed his eyes, his long lashes trembling slightly. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my lips. When he pulled away, his breathing was uneven. Like this. After a pause, he added, or maybe more. I ruffled his hair with a smile. All right, let's try being together. Wangjiang's holiday was short, only a day for the school anniversary. The next day, Nian Zhou rushed back to City A for classes. Whenever I was alone after that, the system would pop up to chat. I do. In the original storyline, I had met Nian Zhou when he was already a ruthless, influential tycoon. Obsessed with me, he'd used every means to possess me, eventually imprisoning me. Unable to endure the life of being his possession, I had stabbed him and jumped to my death, clutching his lifeless body. Even after you stabbed him, he used his last strength to pull you in for one final kiss. He told you not to be afraid and to live well without him. But you couldn't bear the thought of life without him, and that's when you realized you loved him too. So, you died with him. The system paused before adding, you two were a tragic love story, but it was mutual. That's why I gave you this chance to rewrite it. I looked out at the chilly early spring, where budding leaves emerged on bare branches. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. Your Nian Zhou flashed the caller ID. Thank you, I whispered to the system. It replied cheerfully. I really like him, I said softly. Next Wednesday, Nian Zhao's voice was calm on the phone, devoid of any discernible emotion. Come meet me here, okay? He sent me the location of a hotel via WeChat. I didn't hesitate long before agreeing. When Wednesday came, I entered the hotel room, only to be gently pulled into a warm embrace from behind. Baby. A low, deliberate voice called me, followed by Master. He leaned in and bit down on the sensitive skin of my neck, the pressure sharp and deliberate. Don't bite, I said, elbowing him lightly. Do you really think you're a dog? I'm your dog, he murmured with a soft chuckle, moving to press delicate kisses along the corner of my lips. Master, he said, I've graduated from Wangjiang. I've decided to enroll at C University. From now on, we can see each other all the time. Wangjiang, as an elite academy, operated differently from most schools. While not a higher education institution, it followed a credit-based system, allowing students to graduate early if they earned enough credits. Nian Zhou had been 2 years behind me, set to graduate next year. No wonder he'd been so busy recently, leaving little time to contact me. He must have been working on finishing his credits early. As I reflected on his determination, impressed yet unsurprised by his efficiency, he asked softly, Are you happy? Caught off guard, I nodded awkwardly in his arms. You said before that I was still a kid while I was at Wangjiang, he continued, his voice low. But now that I've graduated, does that mean we can finally do more? He could hug me, kiss me, even nibble me all he wanted. But more? I wasn't ready. I wriggled out of his grasp, pushing him away with a muttered suggestion to cool off with a cold shower. But just as I reached for the door handle, I felt the cold, unmistakable sensation of metal locking around my wrist. Handcuffs, my heart skipped a beat. I instinctively pressed the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. Nian Zhou, I turned around, my voice trembling with disbelief. Are you insane, Master? His brow furrowed as he reached for my wrist, but I yanked my hand away. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice carrying a desperate vulnerability. I don't want you to leave me. Don't want me to leave? The system's ominous words flashed in my mind. In the original timeline, Nian Zhou imprisoned you. You couldn't bear it, and eventually killed him. I looked at the boy standing in front of me, so familiar yet utterly foreign in this moment. The sight of him locking the door and cuffing me filled me with a sense of profound absurdity. For a fleeting moment, I laughed, bitter and hollow. You wouldn't dare, Nian Zhou, I said, taking a step back until my shoulders pressed against the door. I closed my eyes and tilted my head up. Unlock these cuffs now. You don't want me to leave? I asked, my voice trembling. After a pause, I continued. If you keep this up, it's truly over between us. I'll never forgive you, not even in death. Do you think I'd tolerate being imprisoned? Either you kill me, or I'll make sure I kill you first. The grim image of him lying in a pool of blood, my arms wrapped around him, flashed through my mind. By the time I reached the end of my sentence, my voice was cracking, a cold tear tracing its way down my cheek. I'm sorry, Chen Cheng, he whispered, his voice so soft it seemed afraid to shatter the air. He pulled me into his arms, his kisses frantic and scattered, his hands fumbling to unlock the cuffs. The handcuffs fell to the ground with a clatter. It's my fault, I'm sorry, he repeated, his voice breaking. Don't cry, please, I can't bear the thought of you leaving me. I only have you, Chen Cheng. He pulled out a key card from his pocket and swiped it against the door to unlock it. I'm sorry. Don't be mad at me, please. Seeing the open door and the discarded handcuffs, I exhaled shakily. His fingers gently tugged at the hem of my shirt. If you want, you can hit me. Please, master, don't be angry. For a brief moment, I really wanted to slap him. But looking at his face, hearing him apologize again and again, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I wrapped my arms around him, my hand brushing over his hair. It's okay, Nian Zhou, I said softly. It's fine. We can have a normal relationship, right? I added, like regular couples. There was no need to repeat the tragic path we had once taken. His body trembled slightly as he buried his face into my shoulder. Okay, he whispered. Not long after that night, I agreed to his request to do more. He was an adult now, a Wangjiang graduate. I had no reason to refuse him anymore. After all, it's normal for lovers to take their relationship further, especially when he looked at me with those downcast eyes, asking softly, Do you not want me anymore? Do you not love me? How could I possibly say no? That night, rain poured down in relentless sheets, pounding against the windows and drowning the world in its chaos. Inside, I held him close, our bond deepening with every passing moment. Years later, on a rare day off when neither of us had to work, I lay in his arms reading a book. It was a poetry collection. I never imagined I could love someone like this. You entered my life like flowers blooming in spring, like summer finally arriving. It was from Mark Levy's Finding You Again.